We are excited to be with you today to provide information and tips on application submissions for the campus program. Next slide. My name is Veronica Murrut, and I am a grant management specialist and member of the campus unit. My co-presenter today is Maria Cristina Pacheco Alcala and Kim Schamberger, grant management specialists. Before we begin, I would like to introduce the team. Our supervisor is Associate Director Latinisha Lewis. The remaining grant management specialists on the campus unit are Jessica Neal and Yolanda Rivera Quintanilla. Our support staff is Essence Dickens, Grant Administrative Specialist. Next slide. The purpose of the pre-application information session is to highlight a few key points in the solicitation. However, it is not the intent, nor is there sufficient time to go over every aspect of the solicitation. Therefore, the agenda for this session is to cover the campus program description, including changes in the program, federal award information, eligibility requirements, key submission information and deadlines, application components. GFMD has provided information, and finally, we will provide tips for submission. Next slide. All applicants are responsible for reading the FY 2024 campus solicitation and the OVW solicitation companion guide to ensure that a complete application is submitted. OVW staff cannot comment on the quality of an applicant's proposed project or provide any information outside of what is included in the solicitation. However, campus unit staff will be available to respond to questions about the application requirements throughout the period that the solicitation is open. Please feel free to send questions to campus mailbox at ovw.campus@usdoj.gov. At the end of the call, this PowerPoint and script will be available on OVW's website, and the link to the recording will be available in approximately 14 days. The materials will be posted in English and Spanish once translated. Before we get started, you may find it helpful to have the campus solicitation in front of you as a point of reference during this information session. There is a lot of information to cover. The Q&A session will take place in the end of the presentation. We may be unable to address all of the information included in the PowerPoint. However, the slides will be posted for your reference. We will ask that you submit all questions in the QA box to ensure we can capture them. We will read the questions loud so all participants know which question we are responding to. We will also try to not repeat the questions if they have already been answered. Your attention to the questions and answers is important. Next slide. Campus program description. Next slide. The campus program encourages a comprehensive coordinated community approach that enhances victim safety, provides services and support for victims, and supports efforts to hold offenders accountable. The funding supports activities that develop and strengthen trauma-informed victim services and strategies to prevent, investigate, and respond to domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking on campus. The key thing to remember is that this grant funding focuses on the previously mentioned crimes. As such, your proposal cannot address bullying or general violence because they are out of the scope for this program. In addition, sexual harassment can only be addressed when it is used as an umbrella term for these crimes, such as in the context of your campus policy. Next slide. Changes in the program. If you are familiar with the campus program, either as a prior recipient of funding or as a previous year applicant, there are a few changes that we want to highlight in the FY24 solicitation. The first change to note is that if the applicant fails to provide the statutory minimum requirements letter at the time of application submission, it will not prevent an application from being considered further. An applicant that is missing the certification to implement the statutory minimum requirements letter will be required to submit the certification letter before receiving an award. The second change applies to tribal colleges or universities, TCUs. All TCUs can submit letters of commitment, or LOCs, from each mandatory external partner in lieu of a signed external Memorandum of Understanding, or EMOU. Next slide. Purpose areas. The campus program has 13 purpose areas as a result of VAVA 2022. You are required to select one purpose area, but can select more than one as it is relevant to the proposed project. We are not going to cover each one, but they can be found on page 5 of the solicitation. Next slide. Please note that the purpose areas 4, 6, 7, and 13 have additional considerations. If you select purpose area 4, then several considerations are needed. You must allocate 20% of grant funding to this purpose to provide direct victim services. This does not include outreach and training activities. Also, if victim advocacy services include providing legal services, then the legal services certification must also be submitted with the application. Purpose areas 6 and 7 cannot make up most of the budget or project activities. Since the goal of the program is to provide comprehensive approaches to these crimes, these purpose areas cannot be the only selected purpose areas. If your proposal includes items in purpose area 7, then, if awarded, approval must be granted by OVW prior to the purchase of these items. Therefore, you can include this cost in your application submission. Purpose area 13 must implement restorative practices as defined in section 40002A of the VAVA of 1994. Next slide. OVW priority area. On page 7 of the solicitation, we provide information regarding the FY 2023 OVW priority area for the campus program. The selection of a priority area is optional for the applicants. Should you choose to select a priority area, then your application will be assessed based on the extent to which you met its requirements. Please be certain that you have reviewed the requirements for the priority area. Applications that adequately address the priority area will be given special consideration during the recommendation process. The priority area is advance equity and tribal sovereignty as essential components of ending sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking by improving outreach services, civil and criminal justice responses, prevention, and support for survivors from historically marginalized and underserved communities, particularly those facing disproportionate rates of impacts of violence and multiple barriers to services, justice, and safety. Next slide. There are two ways that an applicant can meet OVW priority area. There's an option A and an option B. Option A, the institution must be designated as an Asian American and Native American Pacific Islander serving institution, Native American serving non-tribal institution, predominantly Black institution, Alaska Native serving institution, Native Hawaiian serving institution, historically Black college or university, or HBCU, tribal college or university, or TCU, or Hispanic serving institution, or HSI, proposing to develop or enhance prevention and intervention strategies targeting and underserved populations. You must be designated by the Department of Education as one of these institutions. You cannot be considered an emerging institution. Option B, the applicants support historically marginalized and or underserved populations in a thoughtful and strategic way by proposing to develop or enhance culturally and linguistically specific prevention and intervention strategies for these populations. An applicant must include in their proposal activities tailored to meet the identified underserved population, relevant partnerships with the community-based organizations with expertise in working with the identified underserved population, and budgetary resources to ensure accessibility of meetings and materials for the identified underserved population. For example, if you propose that your campus will work with students with disabilities, then the proposal should reflect the prevalence and dynamics of these crimes in this community, as well as specific activities that address the unique needs of students with disabilities who are also victims of these crimes. There should be activities to ensure events and materials are accessible for various disabilities, and relevant partners should be involved in working with people with disabilities. One mistake many applicants make is simply repeating what is written in a solicitation, and those don't receive priority consideration due to lack of details provided. An applicant can do both options A and B if applicable. Next slide. Activities that compromise victim safety and recovery. OVW does not fund activities that jeopardize victim safety, deter, prevent physical or emotional healing for victims, or allow offenders to escape responsibility for their actions. Please reference page 8 of the solicitation and the solicitation companion guide for the list of these activities. We are not going to go through them one by one. Instead, to assist you with submitting a solid application and developing victim-centered projects, we will go over some of the ones that have caused applicants to receive point deductions during application review. Next slide. Procedures or policies that fail to include conducting safety planning with victims. It is not enough to say that you will conduct safety planning with victims. A strong project will provide details of how safety planning is incorporated into response protocols, procedures, and policies. How and when safety planning is conducted with victims, what is discussed during the safety planning process, and the distinction between safety planning for domestic violence versus sexual assault versus stalking survivors. Project designs and budgets that fail to account for accessibility needs of individuals with disabilities, with limited English proficiency, or who are deaf or hard of hearing. Peer reviewers usually deduct points from the project narrative and the budget for applications that do not include information and designate funding or how applicants will make their services and products accessible to individuals with disabilities, left or deaf and or hard of hearing. Please give this serious consideration when completing your application. Failing to develop policies regarding confidentiality of information, informed consent, and mandatory reporting. This is another one that peer reviewers routinely deduct points for during the peer review process. Having these policies in place not only protects the safety of the victim, but also enhances the working relationship between service providers and increases delivery of services to victims. Do not assume that peer reviewers will know these policies exist because you are an institution of higher education. They are looking for information that details how victims' information will be protected, how you will obtain consent by best practices in the field, and what is your institutional policy on mandatory reporting. The only way for the reviewers to know this is if they read it in your project narrative. Next slide. Out-of-scope activities. The campus program has specific out-of-scope activities that grant funds cannot support. To assist with submitting a solid application, here are a few of the most common ones that have caused past applicants to receive point deductions during the review process. Activities primarily focused on sexual harassment that do not involve domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking. This out-of-scope activity was updated to reflect that these crimes are now encompassed under sexual harassment in Title IX. It is important to emphasize that activities will focus on domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. If you utilize the umbrella term of sexual harassment to represent these crimes. Trainings, conferences, or materials focus primarily on the Title IX and not on the crimes themselves. Certainly, campuses can propose policy development and response protocols, including clarifying reporting structures and ongoing trainings to address domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking, since they are covered under Title IX. Still, this grant is not meant to support Title IX compliance, and as such should not be focus of grant activities. Applications must clearly state that the activities are focused on domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. Utilizing the Title IX as an umbrella term is not synonymous with identifying that these crimes are being addressed. Purchase of anonymous web-based reporting systems. This excludes law enforcement incident report databases or apps for students. Applicants can include reporting systems for law enforcement use or information systems for victim services, as long as the information included can be kept confidential. Information is not disclosed without the victim's consent, and victims can opt out of including personally identifying information. Please review the complete list of out-of-scope activities on pages 8 to 9 of the solicitation before writing your application to ensure you do not include any listed activities in your project. We strongly urge you to carefully review the information we have just discussed. We have seen application miss funding cut-off score by just 1 point because one of these activities was included in your application. Next slide. While unallowable activities are listed on page 24 to 25, there are two common unallowable costs seen in proposals. Tuition reimbursement in lieu of salary of project staff. We often see this for graduate assistant positions. The second is fundraising. Applicants often include fundraising for the local victim services organization. While we would like to see this type of collaboration between the campus and community partner, these activities cannot be supported as part of grant-funded events or activities. Now I will hand over the presentation to Kim.
Thank you, Veronica. We can go to the next slide. Next, we will devolve into key award information to consider as your development for your proposal. Next slide. The grant award period is for 36 months, tentatively beginning on October 1st, 2024, and ending on September 30th, 2027. Applicants should submit applications with project activities and budgets that reflect this period. OVW estimates it will make up to 31 awards for an estimated $12 million. In FY 2023, awards will be made up to $400,000 for 36 months. OVW has the discretion to award for greater or lesser amounts, then requested, negotiate the scope of work, and budget with applicants before or making an award. Next slide. Both new and continuation applications are being accepted. New applications are those who have never received funding under the campus program as a lead institution or whose previous funding expired on or before March 31st, 2024. Continuation applications are those with an existing campus grant or whose campus grant closed after March 31st, 2024. Grantees who were awarded a campus grant in FY 2022 and FY 2023 are not eligible to apply as the lead applicant or be a partner subrecipient of an FY 2024 proposal under this grant. In addition, satellite or branch campuses are not considered separate institutions. Therefore, an institution with multiple satellite or branch locations must apply as a single applicant. The campus program has eliminated the restriction on how many times a campus can receive funding. As such, applicants who have received 3 or more prior cycles of funding will be supported in FY 2024. Next slide. Now I will refer to the complete list on pages 10 through 14 of the solicitation for more information on the mandatory requirements. All applicants funded under the campus program must complete the requirements included. The requirements included OVW sponsored technical assistance, including trainings and webinars and a new grantee orientation, as well as statutory and other program requirements and staffing requirements. Next slide. There are 4 statutory requirements that all applicants must certify that they will implement when applying for funding. If you have already previously or have current funding, it is important to note that these requirements have changed due to VAWA 2022. Therefore, applicants must create a coordinated community response to these crimes, establish a mandatory prevention and education program for all students to include training for incoming students, bystander training, and ongoing prevention efforts. Provide ongoing trainings to all campus law enforcement, and provide ongoing trainings to all participants in the resolution process, including the campus disciplinary board, Title IX office, and the student conduct office. This means that investigators and individuals responsible for appeals and sanctions must attend. If funded, at the end of your award, you must demonstrate that your campus has met all these requirements with or without grant funding. Next slide. Applicants who receive funding under the campus program must engage in and provide other required activities throughout the award period. Applicants must offer confidential victim services and advocacy. This requirement is to provide access to 24-hour confidential victim services and advocacy to survivors of these crimes, regardless of whether these services are located on campus, co-located, or as a referral relationship with a community partner. Applicants must also work closely with OVW technical assistance providers throughout the entire project period. Also must follow the appropriate staffing and other requirements for new and continuation grantees. Next slide. New grantees will emerge in a 1-year planning period. This means that implementation activities cannot be conducted. This is important to consider when developing your budget development. As your campus considers activities in the project's implementation phase, these activities should be budgeted for 2 years, not 3. You will attend a minimum of 5 trainings and 1 new grantee orientation. These events should be described in your budget. No more than 3 people should attend the orientation. Regarding the 5 trainings, 3 trainings will be held in the first year, 1 training in year 2, and the remaining training in the last year. For the first year trainings, 6 to 7 people are required to attend. 4 people are required to attend the remaining 2 trainings. You also must support a project director at least 0.75 FTE. During this dedicated time, the project director should be working only on the grant implementation activities. It is the campus's discretion if it wants to support this position at a higher FTE with or without grant funding. Continuation grantees must implement new activities beyond the statutory and program requirements. This will be addressed after the award. You also must support a project director at least 0.5 FTE, unless a justification can be provided that less time won't impede project implementation. A supervisor requirement exists for both new and continuation grantees. The project director should not be supervised or housed in the Title IX office or with any position serving a Title IX role. There is no exception to this requirement at this time. In addition, the project director must not be a Title IX coordinator, victim advocate, or serve in a confidential advisor role. Next slide. Now let's begin with the most important thing: who is eligible to apply for grant funding? Eligibility is mentioned on the solicitations cover on page 14. Next slide. Eligible applicants are limited to institutions of higher education. OVW is required to ensure equitable distribution of grants to historically Black colleges and universities, the tribal colleges and universities. In addition, the Violence Against Women Act reauthorization of 2022 included a 10% set aside for HBCUs and a 50% set aside for HSIs, Hispanic Serving Institutions, and TCU's tribal colleges and HBCUs. While most of the funding directed to these institutions will be utilized in an initiative called Strengthening Culturally Specific Campus Approaches to Address Domestic Violence, Dating Violence, Sexual Assault, and Stalking Initiative. The campus program will also ensure to meet these priorities in the solicitation. So we would love to see more of these institutions apply for funding for either solicitation. Next slide. All applicants under the campus program must submit 2 certification letters. If applicable, a third certification must be submitted if an applicant proposes to provide legal services as part of the project or as part of victim services offered to survivors. All letters must be submitted on institution letterhead and signed and dated by the highest authorizing official. As such, generally, it should not be signed by the Chief of Police or Title IX office. The president must designate the signatory to sign on behalf of the university for any federal funding. Certification of eligibility. All applicants must certify in writing that they follow Section 485F of the Higher Education Act awarded in 1965 as amended, which requires that all eligible institutions of higher education collect and report certain types of information that campuses, crime statistics, and campus security policies for their respective campuses. A sample certification of eligibility letter can be found on the OVW website. Certification of statutory minimum requirements. All applicants must certify that they know of and are committed to fully implementing each of the campus programs' statutory minimum requirements. Failure to provide the statutory of eligibility letter, or if it includes incorrect signatures, will disqualify an application from further consideration. The signed certification letter must be uploaded as a separate attachment in Just Grants. If the applicant is proposing to provide legal services as part of the project or victim services that will be provided, A third certification titled Delivery of Legal Assistance must be submitted. Since this is a new requirement due to the VAWA 2022, an applicant will not be eliminated during the initial review of the application. However, before an award can be made to an institution, this certification letter would need to be submitted. If this certification is missing, OVW will contact an applicant during the review process to submit this certification letter only. The signed certification letter should be uploaded as a separate attachment in Just Grants. Some common mistakes that applicants make regarding eligibility are incorrect signatures, incorrect certifications being submitted, and missing the required certifications in all. Next slide. Lastly, in addition to the certification letters, there are 2 required partnerships. Without them, your application will be deemed ineligible and will not move forward with the review process. These partnerships must be reflected in the External Memorandum of Understanding, or EMOU. There must be at least 1 criminal justice agency. As such, a local or tribal law enforcement agency, prosecutor's office, or court. I want to make a note that an applicant with sworn campus law enforcement or campus security officers must partner with a criminal justice agency from the jurisdiction or tribe in which the campus is located. If an applicant has non-sworn campus law enforcement or security officers, that campus must partner with a local or tribal law enforcement agency. A campus may also partner with another criminal justice agency to strengthen its responses, as well as making sure you have at least 1 domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking victim service provider within the community or tribe where the institution is located. For rural campuses, this may mean a victim service organization serving multiple counties or located in another county. Eligibility is where many applicants make mistakes and are eliminated from further review. So in your application submission, address all of the required components. Next slide. Now we will begin to address key submission information. Next slide. The cover of the solicitation provides information on registering. Registration includes registering with the System of Award Management, called SAM, and grants.gov systems. Also registering with Just Grants. All applications must first register with SAM and grants.gov. Please refer to your solicitation for the appropriate date regarding registration for SAM and grants.gov. Organizations must update and renew their SAM registration at least once a year to maintain an active status. The average time is in about 1 week. As such, it is important to register for both systems as soon as you can to avoid being unable to submit an application. Registration with both systems must be completed before you can register with Just Grants. Second, applicants must register the entity administrator and the application submitter with Just Grants before the Just Grants deadline. Registration in Just Grants takes about 3 days. within 24 hours of Just Grants receiving the F-424 and SFLLL from grants.gov. The applicant will receive an email from Diamond with instructions on creating a Just Grants account. You will find more registration and deadline information on pages 39 of the solicitation. Next slide. As you begin the application process, you may notice a change that your institution now has a unique entity identifier instead of using your DUNS number. On Federal 4th, 2022, a federal government stopped using the DUNS number and moved to the new Unique Entity ID known as the UEI. The Unique Entity ID is a 12-character alphanumeric value, and once issued, it will not change. Entities that are currently registered in sam.gov already have a Unique Entity ID, which can be viewed on sam.gov. The transition to UEI will not impact an entity's registration expiration date or the time it needs to be renewed. Next slide. It is important to know that there is a two-step process. A complete campus program application has components of the application that will be submitted in both grants.gov and Just Grants. First, the SF-424 and SFLLL is submitted in Just Grants. The final deadline for submitting the two documents is May 16th, 2024. If you do not submit these documents in grants.gov by the deadline, you won't be able to submit the remaining components of the application. The deadline will not be extended, so make sure you submit these initial documents as soon as you can. It is a critical step to completing your application submission. The remaining application documents are submitted to Just Grants. The deadline for submitting the remaining documents is May 21st, 2024. Remember, there are preliminary steps that must be taken before you can submit the remaining documents in Just Grants. Once registered in Just Grants, the application submitter will receive an email link to complete the rest of the application in Just Grants. The entity administrator also needs to log into Just Grants to review and invite the applicant's authorized representative before an application can be submitted. More information on Just Grants roles is available on the Just Grants website. Remember to review the checklist on pages 37 through 38 to ensure you have submitted all required documents before finalizing your submission. Next slide. Applicants experiencing technical issues with Just Grants should contact the OVW Just Grants support desk immediately. Please make sure to contact OVW's help desk provided in this PowerPoint and in your solicitation. Another DOJ Just Grants help desk exists, but reaching out to the OVW help desk will better support your ability to submit a timely application. If you experience any Just Grants technical issues, ensure that you continue developing the proposal while working to address any problems. Applicants should follow the solicitation guidance regarding technical difficulties. This will enable you to submit a full proposal by the deadline using an alternate method necessary. Now I'll return the presentation over to my colleague, Maria Christina.
Thank you, Kim. Next slide. Now we will be discussing the application components. Next slide. Please refer to the solicitation beginning on page 18 for specific information related to the content and format of the application submission. All applications must include the following 5 components: a project narrative, a budget detail worksheet and narrative, memoranda of understanding to include both external and internal MOUs or letters of commitment, certification of eligibility, and certification of statutory minimum requirements. If applicable, a certification of legal assistance must also be submitted. Applications that do not include these components will be considered substantially incomplete and will not be considered for funding. Please note that an application won't be removed from further consideration if missing the certification of statutory minimum requirements or delivery of legal assistance letter. However, they will have to be provided prior to receiving an award. Next slide. The summary data sheet provides a brief snapshot of your project. This data is used in the initial review of your application. While this document is not scored and doesn't count towards the 20-page limit, it is important to capture key information about your institution and the proposed project in the summary data sheet. Next slide. The project narrative consists of 3 sections: the purpose of the application, what will be done, and who will implement. All combined, the project narrative is worth 55 points and is the bulk of the application. The project narrative must be double-spaced. This component of the application submission is where applicants provide detailed information related to their proposed project. Before I get into each section of the proposal narrative, it is important to discuss the page limit. You must be mindful of the formatting, see page 20 for those specifics, and the number of allowable pages. The project narrative can include charts that can be single-spaced. However, charts should be used sparingly and not make up most of the narrative. Peer reviewers must stop reading and scoring this section at the page limit. You do not want to lose valuable points due to going over the page limit. That said, the proposal narrative should be no more than 20 pages. The project narrative is designed in the following way. First, each section begins with criteria that all applicants must address. Second, it follows by criteria that must be addressed based on your applicant type. Next slide. This section describes the need of the project and helps reviewers understand your specific campus community needs. Common mistakes include providing too much information that is not relevant to the proposed project, or not enough information to be responsive to what is being asked. Follow the guidance on page 28 of the solicitation to ensure you are providing the required information. Also, keep in mind that this section counts towards the page limit. You want to be sure that you're responsive to the questions in this section, while at the same time ensuring you have enough pages remaining to provide detailed information on the proposed project. We have seen applications where the applicant used more pages to describe the need for the project than the number of pages to describe the project activities to address the problem. Robust applications find the balance between justifying the need and providing detailed information on how the need will be addressed. Continuation applications should address what efforts they have made previously to meet the statutory and program requirements, but also what gaps remained and/or how you want to build on previous efforts such that you are seeking funding again. Next slide. What will be done? This is the section where you will describe what you will do with the grant funds. This year, we have changed some of the criteria in this section because we know that awarded institutions will develop a strategic plan during the first year of the award. As such, we have reduced criteria in this section to key information that we want to know about your project. You should provide detailed information that clearly describes the activities and strategies to support your proposed project. Information provided in this section should be clear and thorough so that reviewers understand how the project will fully address the components listed. For example, there is a difference between stating, "We offer victim services by partnering with a community victim services organization," versus, "Victim services are offered by the X-Rape Crisis Center, which provides crisis intervention, court accompaniment, legal advocacy and representation, safety planning, risk and lethality assessments for domestic violence victims." Next slide. Some of the common mistakes to avoid in this section are not fully answering the criteria in the proposal, because sometimes applicants will answer only part of the criteria, which results in partial credit when assessing your proposal in the application review. And then not including concrete activities and strategies that will be developed and/or implemented to meet the OVW priority area that the applicant has identified in the summary data sheet section. Next slide. Who will implement the project? In this section, the applicant should identify who are the key individuals, departments, and organizations involved in the proposed project. This section does not list all of the partners involved in the project. All the partners should be reflected in the MOU. This section must demonstrate that the individuals, departments, and organizations identified can address the stated need and can successfully implement the proposed project activities. Therefore, providing details on their expertise and experience is critical here. In addition, clearly specify each organization and individual's roles in the project. If you plan to hire one of the key positions, provide a brief description of the experience you hope that they have and the position's responsibilities. You will find criteria in this section regarding the commitment, dedicated time, and use of the project supervisor's position to obtain leadership, buy-in, and support for the project activities. We have found that the project supervisor is equally important in ensuring that successful launch and continued progress of the project. If you are addressing the priority area related to underserved populations, you must identify the campus and/or the community partner with expertise providing and working with the identified underserved population and the services they provide to meet the needs of this population. As a friendly reminder, this section is also part of the page limit. Make sure to keep this section focused on who is involved in the major project activities and who is most responsible for ensuring the goals and objectives of the proposed activities are met. The biggest common mistake here is the lack of details regarding the demonstrated experience and expertise of key personnel, including not providing roles and expertise of individual, departments, and organizations in this section, but pointing out to the MOU. Applicants miss receiving points in this section because the required information is included in the MOU instead of in the project narrative. And as such, the points associated with criteria in this section will not be applied if located elsewhere. Next slide. Budget detail worksheet and budget narrative. It is important to know that applicants will submit an attachment for the budget within just grants. We are not using the web-based budget as we have done in previous years. During the peer review process, the reviewers will assess and score the budgets to ensure the program requirements are met and do not include any unallowable activity or expense. It is the applicant's responsibility to read this section thoroughly to submit a proper budget. Applicants must submit reasonable budgets based on the resources needed to implement their proposed budget projects. The budget should clearly link the specified project activities to the proposed budget items. Specifically, the budget should not contain any items not detailed in the project narrative. The budget narrative must support all costs included in the budget and explain how the cost of goods and services are determined and how they will fulfill the project's overall objectives. The budget must reflect 36 months of project activity. Funds should be included to attend mandatory campus program training and technical assistance in the amount of $60,000, with an additional $10,000 added for applicants from the U.S. territories, Alaska, or Hawaii. Applicants may include more than the minimum amount. The budget should not exceed the budget caps and should not contain a match. In developing the budget, applicants should financially compensate all project partners for participating in any project-related activities, including but not limited to compensation for time and travel expenses to participate in project development, training, and implementation. The budget must include compensation for all services rendered by project partners, including the victim service provider. If a partner is a state, local, tribal, or territory agency, and the partnership duties are conducted within the course of the agency's regular scope of work, the applicant does not need to compensate the partner if an explanation of this arrangement is included in the budget and in the external memorandum of understanding. In the budget, the applicant should include the narrative that no compensation from the grant will be utilized. The budget should also include funds to ensure project activities and materials are accessible to individuals with disabilities and students with limited English proficiency. For example, videos should be closed captioned and translated into other languages. Written materials could be translated into different languages. Interpreters could be made available at events or in the process of providing direct victim services for those who are deaf or hard of hearing or who speak a language other than English. Please see pages 40 through 51 of the solicitation, which provide detailed information on developing and submitting the budget for your proposed project. In addition, the OVW website has a budget sample for your reference. Please keep in mind that this is a sample used for all OVW programs, so it may include things that are unallowable for this program. Still, it is a good reference to organize your budget, provide a clear computation, and demonstrate detailed justification for all proposed expenses. The indirect costs under the campus program have been revised, but are limited to no more than 20% of the modified total direct cost. This limit applies to both direct recipients and subrecipients of campus program funds. New applicants must have or support one project director position at least 0.75% FTE. Continuation applicants should allocate at least 0.50 FTE for the project director. However, if you want to allocate less time, a justification must be provided if the project director's time is less than 50% to ensure the project can be adequately implemented and is not hindered by the reduced time. All campus program grantees will be required to attend 5 training and technical assistance institutes over the 3-year grant period. As such, we required applicants to set aside a minimum of $60,000 to attend these mandatory trainings. There will be 3 institutes in the first year, 1 in year 2, and 1 in the last year of the award. All grantees are required to bring a multidisciplinary team to the institutes. The institutes are designed for grantees to work in teams and develop the competencies necessary to implement program activities on their campuses. Since trainings will occur across the United States, and if you need assistance out calculating cost, then applicants can use DC as its base site for computation. Typically, budget for 4 nights of hotel stay. For the new grantee orientation, there are 2 to 3 people who will attend. For the training institutes, 6 to 7 people are required for the first 3 trainings, and 4 people are required to attend the last 2 trainings. In terms of victim services, if you propose to develop, implement, or strengthen victim services, the budget should include 20% of grant funds dedicated to that activity. It must be allocated for direct services for survivors and cannot include outreach and training activities. If you propose a needs assessment or evaluation efforts, you are limited to no more than 3% of your budget for this purpose. Lastly, a friendly word of advice. Please do not divide grant funding by year. This format creates more challenges when activities cross grant years, which often happens, and requires approval from OVW to update the budget. Again, our best advice is to follow the sample budget provided to applicants. Next slide. Grants Financial Management Division. The next few slides are provided by the Grants Financial Management Division, also known as GFMD in OVW, which provides additional information on the solicitation's financial requirements. We are going to focus on aspects of your application that relate to the documents that our financial team, the Grants Financial Management Division, reviews. More specifically, we'll discuss some items that GFMD has identified from prior years' applications that could help with expediting our review process. For today, we're going to highlight certain aspects of the pre-award risk assessment and provide you with a link to a detailed webinar on how to develop the budget that will be included in your application. First, we'll highlight the items identified in the summary data sheet, which is completed by all applicants. Specifically, 2 items that we would like to discuss are the single audit response and the IRS 3-step safe harbor procedure. OVW requests that all applicants provide a statement as to whether they have expended $750,000 or more in federal funds during their last fiscal year. If they have, then they indicate that and also specify the end date of their last fiscal year. However, GFMD is finding that applicants do not always include all of this information. Please ensure that this question is answered in its entirety on the summary data sheet. This is question number 3. Another item that we'd like to highlight from the solicitation is specifically for nonprofit organizations. If you use the IRS 3-step safe harbor procedure to determine your executive's compensation, you are required to provide a disclosure letter. Please refer to the solicitation for further details and a link to a sample letter. Note that there are 4 required parts on this disclosure letter. The sample letter outlines all 4 parts of the disclosure. So please be sure to follow the sample and provide a response to each of the 4 pieces. The next item that we'd like to discuss is the pre-award risk assessment questions, which assist GFMD during their pre-award risk assessment review for all applications. Each applicant must prepare a response to all 11 questions, and each question has multiple parts. We've noticed from prior years that applicants do not always fully answer all parts of the questions, which in turn requires GFMD to reach out to the applicant and which may delay funding decisions. Some of the most common issues that we've encountered have been, for example, question number 2, where the applicant indicates that they do indeed have internal policies, that they don't provide a brief list of topics covered in the policies and procedures. On question 3, some applicants fail to provide a brief summary of the organization's process for tracking expenditures, and more specifically, whether or not it tracks budgeted versus actual expenditures. These are just a few examples, but in general, please make sure that you read each piece of each question and provide a full and comprehensive response. Next slide. This next slide highlights some resources that are available as you're creating the budget to be submitted with your application. Over the last couple of years, GFND has developed a detailed webinar presentation on how to develop a budget to be submitted with OVW applications. This presentation addresses some of the challenges that you may face with your budgets and provides some insights on OVW's budget review process. This webinar can be found at the link on this slide. Next up is the uniform guidance, which can be found at 2 CFR 200, and you can use your favorite engine to look for that. And other resources included are the DOJ Financial Guide and the solicitation itself. Next slide. We know this is a lot of information to process, so if you have questions about the GFMD information discussed, please feel free to contact the GFMD help desk at 888-514-8556 or by email at ovw.gfmd@usdoj.gov. Next slide. The Memoranda of Understanding. Applicants must submit 2 MOUs, an internal and an external MOU. Each MOU must represent a commitment to the full length of the proposed project, which is 36 months. The MOUs must be developed at the time of the proposal, and they cannot be signatures should be continuous and can be on multiple pages. Only the TCUs can submit letters of support in lieu of an MOU. Next slide. The internal MOU represents the relationships between all campus partners. Next slide. Then the external MOU represents the relationship between the campuses and their external partners. Applicants are required to submit 1 internal memorandum of understanding and 1 external memorandum of understanding. Next slide. Instead of reviewing everything that must be included in the MOU, we will provide you with some examples of common mistakes. There is no page limit for the MOUs, so there's no reason to shorten the details required for each criteria. Missing signatures, especially the signatures of the required partners. Every person and/or organization listed in the MOU must sign the MOU. Submitting outdated or existing MOUs that were not developed based on this project. The MOUs must be current and responsive to the solicitation requirements. In almost every circumstance, the MOU will be a new document drafted specifically for the proposed project, and including a clause that partners may withdraw from the project anytime. This raises concerns about the commitment of the partners to the project. Next slide. Okay, well, to close out the call, we have some tips that may improve your chances of becoming a campus program recipient. Please note that the following is not a guarantee that your project will be funded, but it is intended to assist you with submitting a strong and responsive application. Next slide. Read the solicitation. As we have mentioned previously, the applicant must read the solicitation in its entirety. Everything that needs to be included in or with your application is mentioned in the solicitation, and any supporting resources are linked or referenced. For an application to be considered eligible and complete and move to the next level of the review process, it must include the following: 2 certification letters, both required partners, a project narrative, a budget detail worksheet and narrative, and 2 memorandum of understandings. MOUs that do not contain any signatures are considered incomplete. Be sure that your project strategies and activities address the areas you have identified as being the purpose of the application. A robust application is focused on the crimes, the campus needs, and the populations that will be served. It is okay for projects to focus on one crime. It does not increase your chances of being awarded a grant by stating that you will address every crime if your project narrative only provides information on how you will address sexual assault. Use the application checklist on pages 46 and 47 of the solicitation. This checklist will help you ensure that all required documents are included in your application when you begin submitting. OVW will not reach out for any missing documents, with the exception of the new delivery of legal assistance certification. We will not review documents outside of the final Just Grants submission unless you are approved to submit the application via an alternate method. Once you apply in Just Grants, you cannot submit another one. Allow plenty of time to gather the required information. To avoid any possibility of missing the submission deadline, submit your application as far in advance of the deadline as possible. Technical issues may arise, and the number of individuals seeking assistance from Just Grants may increase on and near the submission date. Make the application easy to read and follow for all the reviewers. One way to assist with the review is to use the heading and subheading titles in the solicitation for each section. Be sure the application and responses to the program requirements and expectations are complete and clearly written. Avoid or limit the use of acronyms. Remember that the reviewers are not familiar with your campus and will not be familiar with the acronyms that your campus and project partners may use. Print out the application before submitting it to ensure that the appropriate formatting and adherence to page limit requirements. Also, number the pages in your application. This will also help the reviewer track and ensure you follow the solicitation formatting and instructions. If your name and contact information is listed as a point of contact or application submitter, please monitor your inbox. There are times that the grants.gov and Just Grants may reject your application, and you will need to ensure that you are getting those alerts. Next slide. Applicants will submit the following documents as attachments: the summary data sheet, pre-award risk assessment, proposal narrative, and the budget worksheet and narrative. To submit the summary data sheet, pre-award risk assessment, and proposal narrative, look under the proposal narrative section, which will provide headers for uploading these documents. Next slide. The budget worksheet and narrative can be uploaded under the budget section or in the other attachments section. Please utilize the budget samples provided on OVW's website for reference when developing your budget. Next slide. Thank you so much for your time today and for your interest in the OVW campus program. Now we will pause sharing and answer your questions. Please remember to send your questions using the Q&A box. The questions may be sent in English or Spanish. And also you may unmute and raise your hand so we can address all your questions. And so I see we have 2 questions here. We've been answering a lot of the questions live. In regards to the program director, can the position be contracted or do they have to be an employee of the college? And the answer to that is that it could be either, as long as the person responds to the institution and works at the institution. We have another question here that I'll read. In the who will implement section of the narrative, I was confused about what was said about who should be included in that section. Is it everyone on the MOU, or is it more specifically people who will have very direct active parts in getting the work done?
Go ahead, Maria Cristina. Yeah, I left that out there because I figured that kind of requires a longer response and would be beneficial for everyone. But it is really to make sure that we understand how these MOUs or EMOUs, your partners support the program, the expertise, the culture specific expertise they bring to your project, and specifically what you're proposing your project will do and how they support it. Maria Cristina, would you like to add?
Yes, in the who will implement, the applicant does not need to include all the partners listed in the MOU, but those who have more of a significant role and responsibility in implementing the grant requirements. And like Veronica was mentioning, if the applicant chooses to address one of the priority areas, or if the applicant chooses to expand victim services and use 20% of their budget on that, then the Who Will Implement section would have more information about how the victim services would be expanded and who would be implementing those services. And then in terms of the priority area, if choosing to work with immigrant students, then they would have to expand more on what's the expertise or who is that partner that will support addressing that priority area. But who will implement, it's mostly related to the staffing that we'll have in the application. And then the MOU will have all your partners. The sessions don't need to be reflective of one another. There's no need for repetition, but do expand on the who will implement in their roles, expertise. And if you don't have a designated staff hired yet, you may include like a description of the qualifications or expectations for those positions, project director or supervisor.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? You can either unmute yourself and ask a question or drop it in a Q&A.
I have a question in the chat. I understand that internal MOU is one document, but did I hear that the EMOU is one document despite being two different agencies? Thank you. So the internal IMOU should be one document signed by all the different offices or departments that are campus-based. The external memorandum of understanding should also be a single document that includes all the external agencies that you're partnering with, including the two required partnerships. So as long as you meet those two, and if you have more partners, those should be included in the EMOU, but it should be one document that's transparent to all the partners of the proposed application. Do we have any other questions?
I don't see any more in the Q&A.
Thank you everyone for joining us today to this webinar. That's all in case you don't have any more questions, last call. But if you have any questions after this webinar at the OVW campus email address, and we will make sure we will get your question answered that way. Thank you, everyone.